Next, I have the pleasure to introduce Ash Ruddy, who's an author and an ICU parent. Ash was born and raised in a small town in northern Vermont, a former Miss Vermont, Miss America in 2009. Her deep Americana roots eventually led her to love and life in London, England. In 2018, she delivered her son at 24 weeks and 1 day gestation. Today, Ash is married, mother of two. She's a writer, speaker, award-winning business coach, and governor of a highly specialized school. She's an advocate for special educational needs, the female experience, and above all, a life of divine connection. In July 2025, she published her best-selling debut book, 24 and 1, A Mother's Story of Faith, Love, Miracles, which chronicles her family's journey through her son's early start. Thank you, Ash, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been really moved with the last couple speakers touching on the fact that storytelling and hearing parents' perspectives is such a big part of what you all do. So I just appreciate you being so open to hearing it. Today, I'm going to talk about what I'm calling the foundation of FICare, which is FICare's impact on life beyond neonatal care. I think something that we don't talk about enough is what happens once the babies that do survive get home, what resources they have available, and what the parenthood journey is for parents who have been in these neonatal settings, and how often lonely and different that parenting journey is than our peers. And what I hope you'll see today is that family integrated care, I believe, helped me to be the best mom I can to a child with additional needs, because you will face so much in the future that you really had no idea you would ever be discussing, things like education plans and specialist schools potentially. And what begins on those units really can carry on. So your impact is so great. Nadia, if you can switch the page, please. Okay, so about us. My son Michael was born in 2018. He was meant to be born in 2019 in early April, and we went into labor with him in December. He was born on the 13th of December at 24 plus 1. Our pregnancy journey had absolutely no red flags. We were having a healthy, safe pregnancy. We had actually chosen to go a midwife care route instead of a consultant care route. It was my first ever pregnancy. I was fit and healthy, and all the boxes were checked until the day I was going into the city of London to work, and I just had this really weird backache. And I was so busy in the day that it took me hours to realize the backache wasn't just there, and it wasn't just coming every now and then. It was coming in waves. And by the evening, those waves were moving around to my lower abdomen in the front. And I will never forget the moment that I walked downstairs to my husband and said, I was at the end of my 23rd week of pregnancy at this point. And I walked down to Patrick and I said, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but I think I'm in labor." And we actually both did laugh. We chuckled, thinking it was ridiculous. And 24 hours later, Michael was in my arms. So we've not been able to identify why I had spontaneous extreme premature labor. There was no cervical incompetence to be found. My waters didn't even break until the moment of birth. There was no infection found. There was possible placental abruption, but that actually was inconclusive after testing. When Michael arrived, he weighed 662 grams. I just want you to imagine for a moment, so many people in this digital room know what that means. But if you can just put yourself in a parent's position, most parents have absolutely no context for prematurity whatsoever, and definitely not extreme prematurity. And the one question I wished I had asked when we were on the high dependency labor ward and the team from NICU came down and they had a really wonderful discussion, a discussion that I think your previous presenter would have been very proud of when they were explaining to us the risks of delivering a child this early in pregnancy. The one question I didn't ask that I wished I had was, what would he look like? I think in a mom's mind, you imagine a tiny baby is going to look like a tiny newborn baby. And my son looked more like a fetus than I could really comprehend. And this is really where FICare came in hugely, because Dr. Aniko Diel was in the room at Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital. She was the first to intubate my son. And Aniko believes so strongly in delivery room cuddles, really, no matter how the outcome is looking for the child. And so as I sat there in complete shock and confusion, really, about what I was looking at and what was happening in the room, as soon as she stabilized Michael, Aniko said, "Does mom want to cuddle?" And I didn't know it really for years later what that moment meant to us. I think I assumed everyone gets a delivery room cuddle and everyone is called mom right away. And I realized years later, especially after meeting other people who've been through this experience, that family integrated care approach starting in the delivery room is definitely not the norm and is so important. So Michael spent 89 days in neonatal intensive care, high dependency, and special care. He had quite a tricky journey coming off the ventilator, multiple failed extubation attempts, multiple blood transfusions. But then once he kind of hit his stride, he really hit his stride. And from high dependency to home felt pretty smooth. The things that we experienced in those 89 days is really nothing short of miraculous. And I mean the FICare we received. The approach of the team was so inclusive. We felt like we were part of the team, not in a medic kind of a way, but in a these are very important factors in what's going on here kind of a way. And that became incredibly important because Michael was later admitted, once we got him home, he was later admitted to PICU with RSV. And he was in pediatric care for 5 weeks, most of those in pediatric intensive care. So, Nadia, my next slide is going to just touch upon the neonatal unit at Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital had FICare, and the pediatric intensive care unit at St. Mary's did not. So I've had this really unique experience of seeing what it means to have it and what it means to not have it. So to start with what it means to have it, from a parent's perspective, of the multiple things that I learned on that unit from FICare, the 5 that I found most important that help for the long term is, number 1, to trust my instincts. When Michael was only about 2 weeks old, felt like 2 years by that point. When he was 2 weeks old, the registrar on ward rounds turned to me one day and said, they finished their kind of consultation. And then he turned to me and he said, "Mom, how do you think Michael is doing today?" And something in me just said, "I don't think he's okay." And I told the registrar that, and I said, "I have no reason to believe it clinically because I've been watching the monitors. Everything is fine. It's a feeling. It's a look he has, perhaps. I don't know." And the registrar turned to his nurse that day and he said, "Nurse, I would like to start antibiotics immediately. Mom feels that there's something going on here." Now, I got freaked out and I thought, "Oh my gosh, Ashley, just let the doctors do what they do. You don't know what you're doing." And his next round of bloods showed a highly elevated infection marker. He had infection that hadn't yet been picked up and couldn't have yet been picked up. And the antibiotics we started that day very well could have saved his life. That trust that the registrar put in me, not only did it help us so acutely in that moment that could have been an emergency, but the long-term impact of that was so great on me as a mother. because I learned immediately to trust my instincts. The next thing I learned was actually how to take an active role. And this might seem a bit like a, well, of course, to all of you in the room, but I have friends that have had neonatal children and they don't take an active role in the care. And sure, it's very unique, shall we say, changing the nappy of a 600-gram baby with cotton buds and no Pampers diapers small enough for babies that size. But engaging us in his care helped us to feel like mom and dad in a moment and in a situation where you certainly don't feel like a parent. The cuddle, care, and bond in a way true to our family, this really touches on the emotional connection. It goes right back to that delivery room cuddle. I felt the team was on our side. And just like that beautiful reading that the ladies just done before me, that's really all you want in this moment. You just want to feel like the team is championing you, like you're not just another difficult case or another really early baby. You actually do want to feel like the team is emotionally invested because I think it does something to the energy of the room. It does something to elevate the consciousness of what's happening, which is quite hard to describe in sort of scientific or medical terms. But the encouraging for us to have skin to skin, to eventually to have done the delivery room cuddles, to eventually be doing daily skin to skin. We didn't get to hold Michael, but once in the delivery room and once myself for the first 3 weeks of life, and my husband once. So knowing this is why that emotional piece is so important. Because if you, and we were there for 12, 14 hours a day, we were kind of those parents that were always there, standing over him, limited touching, praying and singing over him. And if we didn't have the feeling that the team was with us and wanted Michael to survive, I would have been so frustrated every day not having skin to skin. Like those thoughts, intrusive thoughts would have crept in, like, they don't understand. Why won't they let me hold my baby? Instead, I felt like they can't wait for the day I can hold my baby. They're all watching these monitors so closely to know when is the safe day for me to get to hold my baby. Um, Taking ownership of his medical status. Oh, sorry, I should say one more thing on the previous point. Something has come up today about faith and how to be respectful to various beliefs on the units. I felt in the FICare unit we were in so incredibly welcomed to be who I am and to share what naturally came instinctual to me, which was to pray over my son, to sing hymns over my son. Aniko has told me years later they still call me the mum who sings, which I'm sure the team eventually was very annoyed at because if you have a lady singing for hours and hours in the ward, I'm sure it could get quite annoying. But for me, it was a lifeline. And Michael, at 6.5 years old today, favorite things are swimming and music. So we were always made to feel like we could pray, we could have the baptism. The rules of the ward were broken for baptism, where we brought the priest in and my parents were able to come in, even though there's a no visitor policy. I think these policies are very important, and I think it's also very important when to know when to break them. Next is taking ownership of his medical status. When we moved from intensive care to high dependency and special care, in our unit, the parent was asked to start to present at ward rounds. And this was an incredibly clever way of preparing the parent for what they were going to face outside of the hospital. And I can tell you now, 6.5 years on, that at 3 o'clock this morning, when I was in the A&E with my son having an acute stridor attack, being able to rattle off every bit of medical history for a new hospital that doesn't have access to his records in a sleep deprived and quite traumatic experience is a real gift. And it's a gift that not only is happening still now, nearly 7 years later, but has happened countless times. And as a parent, you've basically been in your training. the day you leave the hospital, the day you have to go back in, the day we were admitted to PICU. It was so ingrained in me. The day we got readmitted and had to go to pediatric care, it was a very intensive experience. He was needing resuscitation. I was literally running him into the hospital, beating down the door. And over the sound of the CPAP and the resuscitation happening, they're shouting to me, "Mom, what's the situation at home? Mom, tell us about the child." And I'm going, "Michael Ruddy, 24+1, spontaneous vaginal delivery, da 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 da." And I just went through every bit. And within 30 seconds, that team had the information that they needed. The next piece of this was the confidence to speak up when care wasn't up to standard. This didn't happen very much at Queen Charlotte's, and I can only speak so highly of that team and what they do. And while things weren't perfect, they were pretty near perfect in the care that we received. But then, Nadia, if you go to the next slide, we did end up having a PICU experience where there was no FICare on the unit. That period of time, although being born at 24+1 is incredibly extreme, I sort of felt okay through it all. And I think that was because of the family integrated care approach. I felt seen and heard, I felt respected, and I felt part of my son's journey and care. In the unit we were in that didn't have FICare, I felt exactly the opposite. We felt invisible sometimes, like doctors were having conversations. We were standing right over Michael's cot and they never approached us, addressed us. We were often not being introduced when consultant handovers were happening. We were sometimes called Ash and Patrick and not mom and dad. There were times where it's quite emotional thinking back to that period. But I want to share it with you because it only underscores the emphasis of what you're doing and how important it is. Sometimes we were made to feel part of the problem, where in family integrated care unit, we felt like part of the solution. We, in the neonatal unit, had felt like we were really brought along the journey, that when something cropped up and they weren't quite sure if it was going to turn into a problem or not turn into a problem, they would discuss it with us. And what that does to the brain is so important. We think it's too easy to think that we're going to scare parents. But actually what we do is we help their brain process what's going on and what could happen and the risks that might follow. On a unit with no FICare, we were having to ask for information. So not only was it not free flowing, but we felt like we had to constantly ask for updates. Can we speak to the consultant? Ward rounds seemed to be done at different times on different days. So we felt like we were glued right to his side. We never wanted to miss that short window that we had. So the sort of, Nadia, you can go to the next slide. The sort of impact all of this has is because of FICare, I left the hospital as an expert in my son's very nuanced medical status. And I had the confidence to help him and advocate for him in various settings. For us, that has meant many settings. Michael is at a highly specialist school for children with severe speech and language disorders. And the journey of getting him from pediatric intensive care, finally at reception, to that moment is a conversation for a different day. Baroness, if that's anything that you'd like to discuss, please let me know. This special needs parenting journey is such a long road. And you think when you're leaving intensive care that you've crossed the finish line. But the truth is you have just edged your feet into the starting blocks of the longest marathon of your life. And because of the FICare background I had, we had to put a team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. We've had assessments for ADHD, ASD, CVI, you name it. We had to fight to find a suitable education setting for Michael's needs. And we had, and those of you who are in the UK may be familiar with this, we had to fight an incredibly arduous EHCP process. For those who aren't in the UK, this is a legally binding document that outlines what your child needs to receive for education provision, which is notoriously very difficult, even for those who have children with severe special needs. Every step of this life after hospital, I had been prepared for from FICare. Those tenements of what I learned that I shared with you had me quite naturally advocating for him, knowing where to push, starting to understand the infrastructures, because every one of these pieces has an additional infrastructure, but we had learned how to navigate that on NICU. And more than anything, it was the confidence. You know, I before Michael came, I'd say I was probably a people pleaser. I really wanted people to like me. And from the moment I entered that neonatal unit, I didn't care about that anymore at all. All I cared about was my son's survival and his happiness. And the confidence that I learned through family integrated care means that through every process up until this point, and for the many that I know are to come, I'm carrying that confidence with me. Next slide, Nadia. That's it from me, everyone. You can find me at ashruddy.com. I have published a book about our journey. It's called 24+1, A Mother's Story of Faith, Love, and Miracles. And it chronicles everything that we spoke about today and more. And I would love to share it with you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ash. That's amazing. I think you've done a fantastic job outlining family integrated care, the foundations, and how that really helped you. And I think that acknowledgement of it's just the beginning of a journey, and it's such an important piece of the journey. The NICU is really important. And so thank you for doing that. I think there's so much more that we could talk about the follow-up journey and the journey through schools and the education system, I think. And so, you know, one of the things I think that whole attitude of family integrated care needs to carry on way beyond the NICU. And I'm so sorry that you had other experiences along the way.